I'm going to start the conference with something a little bit conceptual, and I'm going to call it Fun with Words. And this is a planning conference, but in my mind, good planning really rests on a foundation of having good concepts and a good vocabulary that's meaningful for us. And autism really seems to be in such a persistent state of kind of what I consider to be conceptual muddiness, made complicated by competing dogmas and inadequate terminology and sanctimonious judgmentalism and various on-trend and off-trend euphemisms. I mean, some of you know what I'm talking about. And some of that, I think, diverts our attention away from what are really the most important issues. So, we have we're trying to serve some of the most deeply disabled people in our communities. And sometimes families face conceptual roadblocks as we search for solutions. So this exercise is not intended to be a lecture, but really intended to open our brains to kind of the floodgates of hopefully clarifying concepts. So I'm going to I have like 20 of them that I could do. I have 6. I'm going to run through them. So autism. Oh, where's my baby? Oh my God, I must have some scrolly thing on here. Okay, she didn't show up. The word autism, as we know, is not one thing, and I don't want anyone in this room to deal with it as if it's one thing. It's a hodgepodge term, and there's really no such thing as autism. For example, Temple Grandin, and if my daughter was on this slide, has nothing in common at all with my daughter. Oh, I pushed next, says Yuli. No, didn't work. Okay, imagine a really cute 10-year-old girl. Nothing in common with my daughter, yet they have the same exact label of autism, and that's absurd, and this is a pervasive problem. My daughter is nonverbal. She functions at a toddler level, although she looks completely normal. She has nothing in common with Temple Grandin. But we talk about autism as if it's a unitary thing. It's absolutely not. We're talking about different causes, genomics, neurobiology, cognition, behaviors, and abilities. So, what's true for you is probably not true for you, and I think we just have to, live with that reality. Next term, institution. So institution is a word that has a deservedly bad rap. But I believe it's one that should come back into style and one that we shouldn't be afraid of. Now, there are 2 kinds of institutions. Look in any dictionary and you will see. There's capital I institutions like Agnew's Developmental Center there on the side. And then there's small I institutions, completely different definition, completely different meanings. Large I institutions were places that were kind of coercive and restrictive, mass-scale housing, where we would relegate people that we deemed to be unfit to live among us in society. But small I institutions are things like this, like Stanford is a small I institution. These are stable, community-based, mission-driven organizations, usually a nonprofit, that serve fundamental public purposes. So in our case, those small I institutions provide essential supports and services for those who cannot care for themselves and on a voluntary basis. But lately in the autism world, it seems like we're confusing big I institutions and small I institutions. They're not the same thing. We make no mistake about it. The future of our children depends on the viability of small I institutions and their strength and how we fund them and how we treat them and how they're treated in the tax code and how they're treated in the developmental code. Without our small I institutions, our kids are sunk. In my view, institution is a good word and not a bad word so long as we know what we're talking about. Next, intentional. Intentional is also a word that gets a bad rap, and I don't know why. It deserves to be treated as a very important word in our community. The idea of creating intentional housing or programs has come under fire, but it's an outrage that this has happened, in my view. I'm a special needs landlord in one of my day jobs, and I want to assure you that there is absolutely nothing haphazard, nothing kind of off the shelf, nothing casual about providing long-term housing and care for adults with significant intellectual and functional and behavioral challenges. The decision to rent, the terms of the lease, the protections from eviction, the safety measures, sometimes the amenity, the designs, the materials, the source of the monthly rent, which, by the way, in this area is never sufficient, and the various accommodations which often go far, far, far beyond what the ADA requires. So intentional is a good and indispensable word. It helps and protects and caters to our people. For autistic adults, housing is not a room. It's much, much more than that, and it all requires intention. Next word, epidemic, another hot potato word. Let's be clear about what we are facing. If you don't want to call it an epidemic, that's fine. You can call it a staggering surge. You can call it a dramatic increase. Call it whatever you want. But we are facing a massive influx of adults into our developmental services system that never really existed before. And it's not because of diagnostic shift. If you look at it by birth year, we had about 200 cases per birth year through the early 80s. Now we have 5,000 cases per birth year. If you look at it by caseload, in the early 80s, we had 2,000 to 3,000 cases of DDS-eligible autism. Now we're almost at 100,000 cases. And again, it's maybe a little bit is because of diagnostic shift, but most of it is reality. And if we don't face reality, we can't change the future for our children. Self-advocate. I have absolutely nothing against this word. It's a great word, and it's great a term to describe some people, but it's just insanity to think that it applies to all or even most people with autism. Now let's see I don't know if this is gonna work.
Can you tell me
Okay.
where do you live?
This is 20 seconds of my son.
Can you tell me where do you live? Johnny, can you tell me when is your birthday?
Good job, honey.
All right, very good.
Thanks,
very
sweetie.
good. All right, so he's nonverbal, non-responsive.
That was the conservatorship. You know, when you do a conservatorship, they have an court investigator come over and kind of make sure that everything is what you say it is. So that's who that nice lady was. You know, what's my point? You know, my son Johnny has many excellent qualities. I love him to death. He's my best friend. But let's be honest, people, he's not a self-advocate. And I have so many people telling me, well, your kid's a self-advocate. I'm like, on what planet? So I think it denigrates their reality, and it also denigrates those who actually bear the physical, intellectual, financial, and legal responsibility to care for people like this. So self-advocate is a good term, but it should be used judiciously and not indiscriminately. All right, oops. Last word, person-centered. I have nothing against person-centered. I love, 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 love person-centered planning. But speaking for myself, and maybe not for you, it's actually not my first priority when it comes to long-term planning for my kids. My priority is actually to find people who love my children and who love their work and are rewarded in their work. Because I feel that if I have people who are caring and loving and completely bought into what they're doing for my kids after I'm dead or incapacitated, that my children will have a better chance at a happy, fulfilling, and safe life. And you know, Jim Ball, who's the former board chair of the Autism Society of America, said something I felt was very important. He called autism a whole family condition. And I think that view applies not just to blood relatives, but also to all their caretakers. So when we talk about person-centered planning, I think it's important to not forget that we are also part of this whole family condition. Caregivers are too often invisible and absent from the dialogue about planning for adults with autism, and that's insane. I mean, sometimes they're actually treated like dirt. So the list could go on. I can play word games like all day, but I won't do that because we have much more important things to do. But the point is, I want to free up this conference, free up our community from euphemism and harmful dogma. We should not apologize for the urgency of our issues, and we also should do what's best for ourselves and our children.